My parents stole my identity. What's the most freaked up thing your parents have done to you, Reddit? While growing up, my parents would argue every so often, and it would escalate to screaming matches, and it pretty much sucked. This went on until I was 4 or so. The last time it happened, my father struck my mother, and she decided it was time for us to leave. We lived out in the country where neighbors weren't around for miles. The closest neighbor we had was about 7 miles away. My mother grabbed my baby brother and headed out the door. I was already outside, avoiding them and their screaming. She told me to follow her, so I did. As we were leaving the property, my father yells out for my mother to come back, which she refuses to do so. "Come back or I'll shoot." Alt account 9229. She turned and refused again, and I turned around in disbelief. My father threatened to shoot me if she didn't come back. I just stood there not knowing what to do. My mother's name. "Come back now." I stood there as my mother walked back to grab my hand. As she reached for it, my father pulled the trigger. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital. 2.5 weeks later, my father had shot me in the forehead with a .22 rifle. I haven't seen him since, and I heard he died 7 years ago. That's the most fricked up thing either of my parents have done to me. This should be top comment. That's one of the most fricked up things I have ever heard of in my life. I am glad you lived through it. You're one lucky son of a bee to have been shot in the head and lived, especially as a little kid. My stepmom branded my tongue with a heated up spoon when she caught me lying. Because a lot have asked. Yes, I can still taste. The incident happened about 12 years ago. My stepdad, or one of my mom's pimps, depending on how you look at it, stole my high school girlfriend, got her addicted to H and turned her into a H. He even told me he was gonna do it as soon as he met her. I hope this person is in prison. I married a woman for her papers. Her parents were illegal immigrants. She was born in Mexico 3 months before they made their exodus. When she was 25 years old, she found out that the social security number that her mom was using was actually hers. She was born in Ontario, CA, not Mexico. As a result of her being raised thinking she was an illegal, she dropped out of high school believing she wouldn't be able to graduate without a social security number. California, not Canada. My mother beat me daily, belittled me, told me I should have been an abortion quite often, then left me with her boyfriend when I was 6 while she went out to party every night, fully aware that he was going to physically shame me, and never did a dang freaking thing about it. I was starved by her, beaten, screamed at daily, and then physically shammied by another boyfriend she had when I was older. Thanks, Mom. My parents guilted me into loaning them $8,000, over half my paychecks, for a year, when I was 17. It is now 4 years later and I'm pretty sure they have no intention of paying me back. I think my dad forgot it ever happened. Seriously, my mom is a M addict, among many other things, which I'm sure she was doing while she was pregnant. When I was 8 or so, she shoved a lit cigarette in my nose and tossed me down the stairs. Not to mention the myriad of other physical and emotional abuses she put me through. When I was 14 and tried to kill myself, she laughed in my face and said good riddance. I forgot my dad shot at me with a shotgun. Lucky for me he was too drunk to aim straight. I lived with my mom, and there's so many more things that she and her boyfriends did that my dad didn't pop into my mind immediately. Anyhow, this is how it went. My dad, who I never lived with, had a new dog. When I went to visit him, his new dog bit my little sister, 12 at the time, pretty bad, and she needed to go to the hospital, but he wouldn't listen. He was convinced she was just bitching. She was crying, and the dog started to rush at her again, so I blocked it and locked it in a room. When I went back to where my sister was, she had stopped crying and was dead still, which was weird. Then I realized my dad was aiming his shotgun at her. When he saw me, he shifted to me and started rambling about the dog. I couldn't really think of what to do. I just froze. He asked me where it was, and I told him it was in a bedroom so it wouldn't attack us. And he said something to the effect of, "The dog has more right to be here than you, let it out," and I said no. And then he shot through the floor directly in front of me. After that, he sort of looked dumbfounded at the hole in the floor, and I grabbed my sister and got the frick out. Thanks Uniface for the kitten hug. That was nice. But yay, I had a crappy childhood. There was a lot of stuff that happened that I know I don't remember correctly, probably because it's easier for my psyche that way. I know one specific instance that my sister insists happened to me, but I was pretty sure it had happened to her, so one of us is definitely altering our memories. I guess that's the best coping mechanism I've got. I'm relatively fine now, still got some issues, especially with being around people who are drinking, or who have firearms, but as soon as I was out of HS I moved across the country for college, and I don't really go back home too much. Frick, I'm sorry, I hope you're out of it now. I was stolen by my grandmother as a child. They moved cross country several times, going from church to church avoiding authorities until they gave up. Eventually they found a church that would help them hide. They also didn't allow me to brush my teeth cause fluoride was the devil, or some bad crap crazy thing like that. Kept me homeschooled where all classes were basically read the Bible again. Wasn't allowed outside until the age of about 15ish, unless it was to go to church of course. Had to move back in with them at 19. Had a job and was saving up to move out. I had about 5,000 stored away in cash. Couldn't have a bank account cause I was too paranoid. They tore apart my room looking for either money or drugs while I was at work, then played dumb. Man, the list could go on with these people. This happened to a guy I know. He was a regular guy, funny, outgoing, a little socially awkward and unsure of himself but a good guy nonetheless. It's his senior year of high school. He comes home, walks inside and everything is gone. His parents up and moved while he was at school. House looked like a fire sale happened. He wound up crashing at my ex-girlfriend's parents' house for the remainder of his senior year. They had always liked them. He called her mommy. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. That's fricked. What gutless human beings. My mom and dad separated when I was 8. When I turned 15, he was diagnosed with colon cancer and died a year later. On his deathbed she did everything she could to talk him into marrying her again while he was extremely medicated. She had him brought out home for hospice so he could be with his children. He never agreed to marry her regardless of her constant attempts, but he did make the mistake of giving her power of attorney. He passed away and she took all of his estate for herself and conned my sisters and I into signing away parts of our inheritance while we were still young and dumb. All 3 of us, 14 years later, still have financial trouble when we could have had our lives and educations taken care of by our hard-working father. We no longer acknowledge her as anything but our birth giver now that we are all grown and know what she did to our family. His death day is on the 21st of this month. R.I.P. Dad. Well, starting off, my mother made an appointment to get an abortion when she found out she was pregnant with me. My grandma, Dad's mom, talked her out of it during some sort of 24 hours mandatory think it over, why don't you waiting period. I'm not really that mad about that, but it is dang weird to know how close I came to never being born, and can't help but think my mother should have kept that nugget of information to herself. Over the course of my first 5 years of life, I was ignored, locked in closets until I crap myself, then hit for it. She moved out of the house then, and usually didn't bother with me and my brother. Her new boyfriend didn't want kids, so she acted like she didn't have them. One time, when I was near death with pneumonia, she stopped by the house to steal a cable box. Didn't even poke her head in my room to see how I was. I didn't see or hear from her after I was 6. Until I was 11 and my dad died. He and his shitbag diddler friends are another story, but at least he never directly harmed me. Then she showed up with her butthole boyfriend. She had to introduce herself to me because I didn't recognize her. Turns out she showed back up because my dad had a little insurance money. Brother and I each got enough to buy a decent car, and she figured she would get some of it. Once disabused of that notion, she once more left Dodge. I've pretty much written her off as good riddance, but it really fricks with my brother she isn't around. A few years ago, he called her on Christmas, was tearfully told how hard Mother's Day is for her, and was promised a call to have lunch. Why he wanted to I have no clue, but naturally she never got in touch. I hate her more for breaking his heart than anything she ever did to me. TLDR, I'll be goddamned if I'm having kids. Mine used my social security and other personal information to drain 76. $000 from my savings account, which I had built up over the course of saving every penny working at a crappy used bookstore for 5 years while selling Magic the Gathering cards on the side in high school. Sue that bee for everything she owns. That's despicable. My dad had been saving up for me to go to college since I was really young. When the time finally came, I applied to my top choice college, and I got in. I even got a great financial aid package, with the school covering $47,000 of the $56,000 bill. The first payment is due in less than a month, and my dad gets the idea to tell me he can't afford for me to go anymore. It turns out he took all the money he saved for me, and spent it to fix his house, so he could sell it. But that's not the end. He bought my sister a car. One she relies on to get to work and school. My other sister dropped out of high school a few months before she would have graduated. She also has no desire to drive, but yet she convinced my dad to take the car from my sister, just so she wouldn't have it. TLDR, my dad wants nothing to do with his 2 successful children. I had never seen my mom drunk until I was in grade 8, the year I was 14. My mom had a baby in the beginning of March and my stepfather at the time left immediately, after them being together for 2 years. My mom experienced extreme postpartum depression and wouldn't leave her bedroom for a month. One day, she came out of her bedroom, completely dressed to the nines, and told me she was going out. She proceeded to come home drunk, which was a complete surprise, and passed out on the floor. I was horrified. Besides the new baby, I also had 3 other siblings at the time. After this incident, she continually got drunk until we lost our house in May because she wasn't paying any rent or bills at all for that matter. We moved down a block, into a 3-bedroom duplex with my cousin's family, consisting of 2 adults and 3 kids. While we had 1 adult and 5 kids, it was a little tight on space, you could say. Near the end of May, and my 15th birthday, my stepdad randomly appeared after being gone for 3 months. My mom was beyond excited, and so about 2 days before my birthday, they decided to go out partying for the night. Of course, I had to babysit my cousin's kids and my siblings, ages 3 months 11 years, total of 6 kids. Did I mention I had no internet, no TV, no DVD player, no VHS or any sort of technology at all? Not even a phone. Well, the night turned into the day and I became worried. I went to her friends and called around to find my mom, but no one had seen her. I stayed home and waited. The next day was my birthday, so I was sure she would be home. Nope. I had to call my dad and ask him to send me money so I could buy some food and diapers for the baby because we had none. 2 days later, my mom came back and passed out for another day. Finally, when she wakes up, she asks me why the house is such a mess and tells me that I should have cleaned it up. I never ask her about my birthday or where she was, and she never tells me or wishes me a happy birthday of any kind. 2 years later, she accidentally revealed she went on a crack binge in a city 2 hours away and just left me to fend for myself and the kids. TLDR. My mom left me on my 15th birthday for 4 days with my siblings and cousins to take care of ages 3 months 11 years, 6 kids, to go on a crack binge in a city hours away. When I was 4.5 years old, my mother abandoned me in the back of a car. My father was working out of town, and assumed she was taking care of us, as she usually did, being our mom and all. She left my brother and myself at a friend's house. My brother and I entered the foster system in Ohio, and it was several days before our dad was able to recover us. I eventually, a few days later, had to testify against her in a court. It was terrifying. The next time I met her I was 21. My brother and father died before ever seeing her again, and she didn't bother to come to my brother's funeral. After freaking him over so royally, she couldn't find a way to afford the $500 airplane ticket or $200 in gas. I haven't talked to her since then. That was 5 years ago. My parents kicked me out because I had a girlfriend, then tried to make me pay rent after I moved out. I had a flatmate whose parents disowned her because she moved out. She then informed me she couldn't afford to pay me rent as she was still paying rent to her parents. Definitely fricked up, man. I moved out before I graduated HS and took the first semester for my class off of college, that way I could work and save up a little money just to get a good head start on things. Miami University. Oh, come January I start classes. They end in May. Come August I start classes again. And first week of September. I'll be damned if they didn't pull me out of class to let me know that I owed them around 9 grand to continue to go to school there. Turns out, my dad claimed me on his taxes, and I had listed myself as an independent on my taxes, and on my FAFSA, I was one of the random audits, and they dropped all my financial aid then and there, almost like FAFSA fraud, except I wasn't lying. My dad was just a greedy frick that wanted all the tax credit he could get. So now I will never be able to finish out my dream because I can't go back to Miami until I pay off my initial balance. Sucks, but man, I didn't do anything about it because I was scared of my dad at the time and didn't want to cause any more of a rift in the family. IRS auditors masturbate furiously to scenarios like that. The quickest way to get back to Miami you would be to turn his butt into the IRS for willingly committing tax fraud. The IRS auditors regularly compensate whistleblowers and will likely take care of your back bills resulting from his fraud. My mother forced me out of high school at 16 because she wanted to follow in the footsteps of some people from our church. She gave me a bunch of easy schoolwork that I already learned, and the rest of it was Christian education, which didn't help me in the real intelligent world. I was kicked out at 18 because I fricked and she couldn't support my lifestyle, so I was pretty much thrown on the street with no education or backup. I've spent the last 6 years trying to get into college but for some reason kept getting turned down for financial aid because I was still considered dependent, and she refused to give me the necessary information. I currently have no job, and I'm just now getting approved for financial aid because I'm 24. Now, I'm not blaming her because I'm currently jobless and, essentially, homeless. I'm blaming her because she completely fricked over any legitimate form of education I could have received because of her Christian views. The worst part? She, to this day, says she feels she did the best thing for me, and will not acknowledge that she had no idea what she was doing. Dude, I got a room you can stay in for free. As long as you're continuing to better yourself, it's yours. I've been lurking for a few months, but I thought I'd try my first post here. My mom was always a little batshit, and I'd tried to move in with my dad a few times to get away from her mind games. When it came time for me to go to college, however, things changed a little bit. I got into Caltech and Yale, and was pretty excited because I was from a very low income family. College was going to be paid for with minimal loans through financial aid. So I'm filling out my forms, and I've filled out everything I need to. Just waiting on my mom to fill out the FAFSA. My friends all got theirs in January-February. My mom got mine in late March. Okay, cool. At least she turned that in, right? Wrong. Those colleges also needed a bit more financial information, in the form of another document called the CSS. My mom flat out refuses to fill it out because she doesn't want me to go into debt flunk out. I try to explain she just needs to submit the info. That is non-binding. There's nothing to worry about. But she won't budge. She says it is her decision where I go to college. Not that she's paying a penny though. So I move in with my sister, and figure I'll just tell the colleges the situation when I go to see them. Couldn't hurt, right? Wrong. When I'm actually in the financial aid offices to explain my situation to the counselors and explain what my mom is doing, they tell me that she's called ahead and that I plan to defraud them out of money. Well, frick. I now go to a state school on a full ride. TLDR. My mom went crazy when I tried to get into college, accused me of fraud. My father sometimes took me places where they took care of business when people had attracted a bit too much attention for themselves or decided to try frick over certain people. Taking a young boy to see some men being beaten, tortured, crying for their life and other stuff just to show him the real world. To show that no matter what people tell you, the world is not all flowers and sunshine and people cannot be trusted. One day I went to visit my father, knocked the door, walked in and got to the living room. I opened the door and my father got startled, pulled his gun out and shot at me for 2 feet because he was hyped up on some drug and thought I was someone trying to kill him. I was lucky enough the old thing misfired, jammed, and all I got was a scratch above my eyebrow. My last story is one I don't like telling too often and happened before the above. On an emergency, my father left me with some people he trusted as they knew each other since they were young. He left, Turns out they were trying to frick him over, and to add insult to injury thought, hey, why not frick up his son and teach him a lesson. I do not like that memory, as in leaving me with those people was the worst thing he'd done, not that he knew it was going to happen or anything. My dad kicked me out when I informed him he couldn't sell my car for crack money. This wasn't a kid drives the car the parent owns situation either. I had the title in my name, paid for the car with a part-time job I was working at the time. Insurance, gas, etc. was all me. I still can't wrap my head around how he planned to do this, aside from outright fraud. This situation really sucks because they still feel entitled to see my kids, which doesn't seem fair to me or my wife. They killed all trust between us and it's hard to let them see my kids. On the other hand, I don't want to keep my kids away from my side of the family because it affects my sister, grandmas, cousins, etc. So don't let them. My dad was paid by one of his Buzine's execs to frick me when I was about 10 years old. This guy, his name was Roger, I never knew his last name, had been friends with my parents for a while. He picked me up from school when my parents were busy, took me to ballet practice, etc. That kind of cool guy friend. One day he was taking me home, and while I was changing for ballet, he walked in, his Oxford shirt still on and with no pants. He told me that my dad made him a bargain. He tore my tights and moved my leotard to the side and proceeded for the next 20 minutes in that way. I remember quietly asking my dad. My dad was very intimidating and angry natured. 2 months later and he told me that if I kept up this lying balls he would take me out of ballet. I'm in college now. Not sure if this is considered fricked up, because to start off, when I was 16 my parents spent a fortune on this glass table, solely to help out a friend who needed the money after her husband got laid off. Anyway, they paid about $3,000 for this glass table and 6 chairs. Usually for dinner my dad would ask either my brother or I to set the table up for dinner. I was watching something on TV, so was rushing to get back to it. I carried everything all in my arms so I could get everything in one turn, including a giant glass bottle of Heinz ketchup. Then I slipped while trying to place the stuff on the table. Dropped the bottle right in the middle of the table, snapping it in half. My dad just stood there in shock, and then just said run. As my mother came around the corner, she just started hitting me, ran after me to the door, and just kept on beating me. My dad in the end had to pull her off of me. I ended up having to go to the hospital, and was told to lie and say that I fell while on my bike. Years later my mother laughed about the whole thing. But if anyone in my family ever found out she did that to me, they would have gone mad. Mum died in 2008. Never got the chance to be mad about it anymore. Dad sounds cool. Mom not so much. Not as bad as a lot of these and not even the absolute worst thing my parents did to me, but it's always stayed with me more than any other thing. My mom grounded me for making the highest grade in a huge class project when I was in 6th grade. I made a 98 and when we got home, she irrationally screamed at me and grounded me for the weekend. We're cool now, but it absolutely changed what I told her when it came to my schooling. Nothing. My stepfather constantly talked about my large breasts when I was growing up. Once I became a teenager he took every opportunity to wrestle, grope, and otherwise harass me while my mother did nothing. By nothing, I mean that she pleaded with me to never fight back and not ever report him to anyone because he would get mad and things would be even worse. As if that situation wasn't messed up enough. When I met my real dad at the age of 20, I found out through friends of mine that he worked with that he was heavy into incest erotica. He would bring books with titles like The Family Way and such to work with him hidden half-assed in the slipcover of another book. When I told my 17-year-old sister about it she said that she knew and thought it was no big deal. I no longer have contact with either one of my dads. Oh, and my mom stole the college fund I'd been saving for my entire life to fund her gambling addiction, too. But the incest thing is, to me, a lot more fricked up. I moved out at 16. Of course they claimed me on their taxes and refused to fill out financial aid paperwork to allow me to go to college. It's been 13 years since I've spoken to any of them. A lifetime will not be long enough. The incest fetish is not why I broke contact with my actual father. Sorry about the confusion. I broke contact because he's a leech with con artist ambitions. He has tried to take advantage of everyone he's ever met for probably his entire life. He's one of those guys who moves into apartments, never pays rent, fights eviction until the bitter end, trashes the place, then moves on and repeats the cycle. By the time my half-sister was 17, they'd moved over 25 times. He embezzles from jobs, cons women he meets on dating sites, moves in with them, wrecks their homes, pawns their stuff, and cleans out their bank accounts, then disappears. He even managed to somehow seduce his own stepmother a couple of months after his dad died and married her to cut his siblings out of the inheritance. The incest fetish may be close to his finest quality, actually. Urge to become a vigilante, rising. My parents sent me to an ex-gay camp, physically abused me, tried to get me fired from my job by telling the owner and customers that I am gay and a pervert, and contacted the colleges I had applied to and tried to get them to rescind my applications by claiming to be me. I haven't spoken to my parents in 12 years. Since then, I was emancipated. I graduated from my top choice college with no debt. I was the president of the Kia Club there, and now I have an awesome job. I've decided to choose my family. Well, when I was 13, I was being physically shamed by my stepfather. It went on for about 8 months or so. When my mother found out, she didn't believe me. I went to live with my father, who is wonderful, BTW. I remember her coming to talk to me at my grandfather's house, telling me how I needed to come back home and be a family with her and her scumbag of a husband. During the time when custody was being figured out, her scumbag husband's lawyer filed a habeas corpus in order to get me back in that house. Of course, the court petition was denied. My father got full custody of me, with my mother only being allowed to see me at my grandfather's house. She then soon refused to have anything to do with me until only a few months before I turned 17. TLDR. After finding out I was physically shamed by my mom's husband, my mom stayed by his side and had absolutely nothing to do with me for over 3 years. My mom's husband got sent to jail. While he was there, I let my mom stay with me as he was the provider in their home. She ran my phone bill up over $2,000 in collect calls. I also helped get her on assistance so she could help with rent as we moved to a bigger place to be able to fit everyone. I first had to pay off a bank account over $200 that was in overdraft for her to be able to get money. When she finally got her assistance check, she put me on the phone with the butthole so he could tell me that she sent the whole thing to him as he just got out of jail and needed money. The butthole went to jail for kiddie pee. Then to boot, she took off to go stay him without a goodbye, and I haven't seen her in 4 years and refuses to come back. Ever. We were really close before all of this. Let me tell you what my old man did to me before I was old enough to talk. Because my father loved me so very much, he decided that we should share the same name. My mom had the foresight to be wary of this. She figured with the same name, financial mishaps could easily be blamed on the wrong person. My dad assured her that due to our age difference, that could never happen. However, money got tight around the time I turned 1 and my dad didn't want to cut back. So, what did he do? He opened 5 new lines of credit with my SSN and maxed them all out in a matter of months. That might have been okay if he had ever intended to pay them back, but, of course, he didn't. When I turned 18 and applied for, well, anything, I got a resounding no. I decided to check my credit, and what did I see? Well, you've already heard the story, so yeah, 5 maxed out credit cards. But that's not all. He also assigned medical bills to me, as well as a large amount of other miscellaneous stuff. I've been fighting this crap from the onset of my adult life, and no, I haven't been able to resolve it all yet. Some things would require that I go to court, and call me old-fashioned, but I can't sue my parents. Frick the credit system, and frick irresponsible parents. Do everyone a favor and sue your parents. My dad used to hit me, throw things violently at me, and call me awful names. He never did that to my brother. One awful memory I have is from when I was about 6-7. I tripped and fell down the stairs, and while crying on the floor he came up to me and started screaming at me for falling and then kicked me hard in the stomach. I felt like such a piece of worthless crap. I still remember the sound and feeling. 27 years old now. Things got a lot better when my parents divorced and he met my stepmom, but I still can't trust him or men in general. Pretty much sucks. When I was around 12 or 13, my mother beated me up in her car, parked in front of the bank, cause I had refused to go inside and withdraw all my money to give it to her. Her logic was that since she funded that bank account birthday money, she could take it out and use it if she wanted to. I didn't had the best relationship with my mom growing up. I have a friend, Ron, who has fairly crappy parents. Recently Ron received a $300 traffic fine. He had no money and his parents agreed to help him out. His father told him that he had paid off Ron's fine and all was well. Months later Ron is riding along with his boss. The boss was driving. They get pulled over for speeding. One officer checks Ron's ID and discovers that he has a warrant out for his arrest for never paying the fine. His parents lied to him and he ended up spending the night in jail. My mom contracted an incurable disease and told me it was my fault because I'm gay. When I was little, about 6 or 7, my mom walked in on my older brother violating me. It wasn't the first time it happened and it wasn't the last. She walked in, saw what was happening, turned around, closed the door, and walked away. She never said anything about it to me or my brother or my dad or anybody else. Now at the age of 17, I'm terrified of being violated again and I feel like I can't talk to my mom about anything. She always tells me about the dangers of getting violated by people you know so well, like she knows what it's like. She acts like it never happened. Well, like I said, I feel like I can't tell her anything. So I guess I can't tell her about how my ex-boyfriend tried to violate me yesterday and is now threatening me because I won't let him frick me. I don't want anybody to actually know me and to see this on my main account. I don't know what to do anymore, but this is all pushing me over the edge. I can't hold on anymore. My parents have taken money out of my bank account so my rent check would bounce. Well, when I was around 10 we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. Of course my mother loved to take it up her butt on a pretty much daily basis. They thought riding back doors 4 feet from a sleeping kid wouldn't wake him up. There I was, just wishing it to be over, and I was the one feeling embarrassed. You should have woken up and furiously masturbated over them riding back doors. Assert your dominance. Ready? My wife got a full boat to college. Her father then took out student loans for each year of her 4 years in school, in her name, then skipped town with the cash and she got a surprise phone call about 6 months after graduating. For most of my school-age life, I believed I was allergic to sugar. As awful as this is, it's rather humorous. Not me, but my best friend's mother stole his $35,000 inheritance and kicked him out of the house at the age of 17. If it wasn't for my great aunt he would be homeless. For my 17th birthday my parents offered to have my car fixed for me. Needed about $1,800 in repairs. I had purchased the car with my own money and paid for insurance and gas for it without any help from them. I think this sounds awesome, so I have them drop me off at work. When I got home from work there was a brand new car in the driveway and I was freaking out with joy. It turns out that my parents traded my car in, the car I used to go to work and school, so they could buy my little sister a car. Their reasoning for this is that I only used my car to go to work and school, whereas my jobless sister needed a car to go to softball practice and to hang out with her friends. They paid for the car, insurance, and gas for my sister and expected her to drive me to and from work and school. She got out of ever doing this by just going to her friends' houses whenever I had to go to work, so I ended up walking or riding my bike. They didn't, and still don't, understand why I was upset. My mom caused my eating disorder for years. She would count my calories, tell me no one loved fat people, measure my waist obsessively, order for me in restaurants, deny me dessert while her and my dad ate in front of me. That was fricked up. Even at my very thinnest, 5'9", 118 pounds with a BMI of 17, which is crazy underweight, she would remind me daily that no one, including her, would love me if I was fat. My bio dad was never in my life. I finally found him, got in contact with him, and explained who I was. He told me he was overwhelmed and needed to think but would call me back in a few days. That was 6 months ago. I tried calling back. He changed his number. My grandmother, not quite a parent, but my grandparents practically raised me, lied to me for 18 years about having a college fund. I was supposed to have $30,000 set up, to receive when I turned 21. That was meant to go towards my loans. She stopped paying into it when I was still a baby, but continued to lie until this past January after my grandpa passed. I'm about to turn 21 and I have $18,000 in college debt with no way to pay it. My mom kicked me out of the house, but refused to stop claiming me on their taxes or even admit to my school's financial aid office that she booted me, causing me to lose my financial aid. Oh, high $11,000 in debt I wasn't anticipating. And at the end of the semester, leave school because I couldn't afford it. So, no education for me. My mom claimed to my doctors for years that I was lying about my joint pain for attention. Finally was able to go to my own separate doctor, not the family practice my mom goes to as well, on my own, who referred me to a rheumatologist, who ran a bunch of tests to finally discover that I have ankylosing spondylitis. I have been in constant pain since childhood. Parts of my spine are fusing together and I will most likely be in a wheelchair by the time I'm 40, which could have been avoided if I had been treated from childhood when the symptoms first came around. Since as long as I remember, me and my older sister have always wanted a dog. However, our father would insistently refuse as he believed that we weren't responsible enough to take care of one. After years of constant badgering and insistence though, we got the next closest thing, a little potbelly piglet. It was the cutest little piggy and had a distinctive black head with a white stripe of bristles that down from the top of its head to its wiggly nose. We named it Sonic because it would run around the house at lightning speed, especially when my dad was trying to toilet train her. Sonic's miniature size didn't last long though. Over the months it had grown from a little piglet that we could bathe in our bathroom sink to a 4-foot pig that we kept in our patio area. Its favorite pastime would be to lounge under the dining room table and have us use her as a footrest while we gave her a belly rub with our feet. After having her for about a year, our apartment was about to get renovated. But there was the issue of Sonic. Since we lived in a metropolitan city in Asia, my father explained that there was nowhere to keep her. But my mom, my sister and I couldn't bear to give Sonic away. We loved her. She was part of the family. We tried to find alternatives, one of them being a country club that would allow Sonic to stay there until the renovations of our apartment was complete. My father never signed off on the idea and the issue was ultimately unresolved. My mom, my sister and I went to Sydney for 2 weeks to visit my mom's side of the family. One night, my mom gets a phone call from my dad. Since nobody was willing to take the pig, he decided to euthanize it by sending it to a slaughterhouse to have it killed. He then proceeded to share the news with my grandfather and grandmother, his father and mother, who had no qualms about eating a family pet. The three of us stuck in Sydney all wept. My mother was sleepless for days. When we arrived back from Sydney, one of the first things that my father mentioned was how tasty Sonic was. When we visited my grandparents' father's side, they mentioned the squeals that Sonic was making when she died. How she definitely loved us because she was so confused and helpless and crying when she was forced to be euthanized. A week later, we visited the country club that offered to take Sonic. Turns out that offer was true as they already had a potbelly pig living there. I went to visit said pig and saw two brats kicking sand in its face and trying to ride it. The squeals echoed in my ears, made my heart sink and set off something in me. I beat the one trying to ride it into the ground, broke his tooth and bruised his eye. I don't eat pork anymore. TLDR. Dad got me and my sister a pig as a family pet, then killed it and ate it with his mom and dad. I informed my mom I was moving out on my 18th birthday. She told me if I tried that she would go to the police and claim that because I was autistic I could not take care of myself. She told me that she would get extended custody of me and I would be allowed to leave when she decided. Needless to say, come my 18th birthday I was still at home. Yes, I am autistic. I was diagnosed when I was 7. Pretty sure they actually test to see if you are autistic before they lock you away. My grandparents took all of my dad's college money that he had been saving up since he was a kid and taking paper routes to when he was a teenager and working in a shoe store, and they used it for a private vacation for the two of them. My parents wanted to punish me for having bad grades, so they bought me a puppy and then had it put down a month later. I miss you, Alex. You have been visited by the fashion doggo. Comment your envy strengthens me, so you always look beautiful. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.